what really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, September 7th, 2018. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Oh, my goodness. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. It was a very busy news day for a Friday, is a very busy news day for a Friday. And so let's just get on into it. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Get you on the air with your comments and questions. And let's get on into the stories. Again, there is a lot going on, and we're going to start here with Syria because that appears to be the hottest of the potential flashpoints that could really get World War III going for real. Syria is obviously getting ready for the final push into Idlib. Clearly, Damascus has the high ground, both figuratively and strategically. They've got the advantage. The terrorists either have to surrender or they're going to be blown up. And unless the terrorists are convinced the U.S. is coming to rescue them, the cavalry riding over the hill and, you know, swooping on down to save them. Otherwise, this thing is pretty much over. And they're saying the Idlib de-escalation zone has served its purpose. Now it's time to clear it out. It's time to bring this thing to an end. They're absolutely right here. Putin is out there saying that driving out the militants from Idlib is now the top priority in Syria. And it's interesting that Putin is making the statement and not Assad. And I don't think that is a question of ego. I think Assad and Putin are sending a message to the U.S. to just keep in mind that this isn't just the U.S. going against Syria anymore. That this is the U.S. potentially in conflict with Russia, which is something that I don't think anybody but the defense contractors really wants. So there's a lot of little telegraphing going on back and forth here. Russia has issued a warning to the United States saying that Syria offensives are planned near U.S. positions. All these areas where the militants are thought to be protected by U.S. forces. Russia is saying, we're going to go in and we'll get them. And that's another message saying, get out of the way or get hurt. Now, the U.S. response is that they're postured to respond militarily to any challenge. So right there, we're looking at a potential butting of heads over these militants. And I would like to hope that somebody somewhere is going to say, this is really not a good idea. First of all, the United States itself is coming from a position of extreme political weakness. They have no business being in Syria. The Syrian government doesn't want them there. The Syrian people don't want them there. So the world is sick and tired of all the U.S. aggressions. So we could see something happen there. And for the United States government to risk outright war, including nuclear war with Russia, to protect a bunch of terrorists just because they were on the U.S. government's payroll, every American citizen ought to be thinking long and hard about that, about what that means in terms of our national priorities, as it were. Russia is currently running patrols over the Mediterranean with two Tu-160 bombers. And these are big strategic bombers, one of the biggest, fastest, most powerful that they have. And the planes made a 10-hour flight on low-level terrain under difficult weather conditions, basically demonstrating they can get in and get out, nape of the earth flying in adverse weather conditions. And they were accompanied by Sukhoi 30 and Sukhoi 33 jets. So Russia is starting to project power over the region, and that's another point of possible conflict with the United States. And again, Russia is there at the invitation and permission of the Syrian government. The United States is not. Same thing with Iran. Iran is there with the permission and at the invitation of the Syrian government, the legitimate Syrian government. Now, Donald Trump has done another 180-degree shift on Syria, and he's saying the U.S. will stay in Syria indefinitely, and they're back to pushing for regime change. Assad must go, Assad must go, Assad must go, Assad must go. I think Trump and his advisors are just not willing to admit they blew this one. And it's not like it's a rarity. If you look at the history of regime changes carried out by the U.S. government since the end of World War II, they're only batting 500. For every 2 they try, they only succeed in 1. So it's not that big a deal, except that it was a very publicized war. And if the U.S. is forced to withdraw, or even if they're just forced to sit there and do nothing, which is actually even worse in terms of the optics, it's seen as a loss. They didn't win, and they're not going to win. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. Mike Pompeo was out there saying that Trump is on board with staying in Syria, and they're back to pushing that story. Assad is preparing a chemical attack. Oh, yes, for sure, he's preparing a chemical attack. Trust us. Yes, yes, we know we lied about Saddam's nuclear weapons. And I know we lied about the last 2 times we said that Assad gassed his own people, and they turned out to be hoaxes. But you can trust this time. Assad is going to be gassing his own people, women and children and puppy dogs. Don't forget the puppy dogs, because Nikki Haley looked into her crystal ball, and she saw it. And apparently Nikki Haley went to Hogwarts, and she can see the future. So Russia's come on back and said, okay, you think Assad is getting ready to launch a chemical weapons attack? Show us where the chemical weapons are. If the U.S. is absolutely sure they have intelligence that Assad is going to launch a chemical weapons attack, then they have to know where it's coming from and where it's aimed. Show us. Show us the proof. Absolute, total silence from the U.S. government. Russia is saying, you know, if you really think there are chemical weapons there, then you need to show respect for the UN Charter and request an OPCW inspection. And that's another big piece that's missing from this story. If the U.S. is claiming Assad has chemical weapons, why have they not sent in the OPCW to find them? At least to verify their existence. But every time the OPCW has gone on in, they find the only chemical weapons are in the hands of the U.S.-backed militants. Meanwhile, Israel is evacuating Islamist commanders from Syria alongside the white helmets. Apparently, back on August 22nd, they evacuated 800 members of the White Helmets, a group funded by the United States, United Kingdom, Germany, and other Western countries that claims to be an impartial civil defense organization, but has been shown to be part of the propaganda mechanism. In fact, on the most recent staged chemical weapons attack, it was the White Helmets who basically grabbed a bunch of kids, took them into the hospital, doused them with water, sprayed their throats with asthma medication, took pictures and said, oh my goodness, it was a chemical attack. And all the doctors and nurses at the hospital said, no, it was just dust inhalation. These guys are phony. And I think one of the ways you know that they're being a promoted group is the fact that they did win the 2017 Academy Award for Best Documentary. They're manufactured from the ground up. It's total fake and phony. As you know, there was a big stink recently where Israel's military basically came on out and admitted they have been arming and supplying Syria's militants, and then the IDF exerted its muscle and ordered the Israeli media to remove the story, to censor it. But it's already out there. In the age of the internet, once it's out, there really is no taking it back. And looking back at all the stories that have come on out, it turns out that Israel has armed and funded 12 different Syrian rebel groups, all in southern Syria. And Israel was sending them weapons, ammunition, money, and even armored vehicles. Now, an ISIS commander was recently captured and basically admitted to the Syrian army he was trained by the United States in southern Syria. And this commander and his forces were transported to the Bodia al-Sham region of southern Syria, where they remained until his capture. And he basically admitted he's there for the money. He's a mercenary. He was given a lot of money to go on in and be this commander. He was trained by the U.S. in southern Syria. Now they've captured him. Now this is kind of an alarming situation. Over in Iraq, in the Green Zone in Baghdad, the U.S. Embassy has been attacked. And early photographs and local statements indicate there may have been a sizable fire that broke out as a result of a mortar attack inside this so-called protected Green Zone. Gee, I'm starting to think that the people of Iraq don't like the United States being in their country any more than the people of Syria or Libya or any of the other countries the U.S. has been invading lately. Over in Basra in Iraq, kind of an interesting situation. Right now, that whole area is seeing a tremendous amount of turmoil and chaos. The people of Basra are rioting because government services have totally broken down, which is what happens under foreign puppet rule, because that government isn't there to run the country for the benefit of the people living in the country. It's there to run the country for the benefit of the foreign rulers, like here in the United States vis-a-vis Israel. So they've been rioting over things like the undrinkable tap water and so forth. But somebody set fire to the Iranian consulate in Basra. And the media is trying to conflate the two to try and make it look like Iran and Iraq may be heading back to a new war. And if you remember the last Iran-Iraq war, that was instigated by the United States. Back then, we were still friends with Saddam Hussein. He was our good buddy in the Middle East. And the U.S. had given him all these chemical weapons and biological weapons, and they sicked him on Iran. And it didn't really work out all that great. So maybe they're going to try and use Iraq as a proxy to go into Iran. Because polls are showing here in the United States of America, the American people were sick and tired of war. We're sick and tired of all the dead bodies. We're sick and tired of our children coming home from the war zones in cheap metal boxes or wheelchairs. We're sick and tired of the wartime economy that we're suffering under right now. And we've had enough. And so just like the United States used Saudi Arabia as a proxy in Yemen, or used ISIS and Al-Qaeda as a proxy in Syria, they may be trying to use Iraq as a proxy to go into Iran. All right, we're going to take a phone call here from Ken in Fort Worth. Aloha, Ken. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Howdy. Hey, Lockheed Martin's going to hire more workers towards the end of the month here in Fort Worth. It's in today's Fort Worth Star-Telegram.
Okay. Any word what specific project this is for? Or it's just a general announcement, more workers?
For F-35.
For F-35s. It's amazing. The design on that thing is not even finalized yet. They're going forward with this idea that they're going to build it as it is now, and then as they work out the bugs, they'll retrofit every F-35 out there with the new components, which is actually a more expensive way of doing it. That's like going down to the car lot and you buy a chassis that's missing a bunch of stuff, and then you have to keep going back to the car dealership to get the rest of the car installed as it becomes available. And you don't even know what it's going to cost yet.
That's exactly the way it looks like. Hey, don't worry, we'll put the lights on it and the horn on it after you get it. Don't worry, just buy it.
Does it have a cup holder?
Hey, you're talking about embassies that have been attacked.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised how many were attacked over the years.
I'm not surprised.
I read across the book one time, and it said here and here and here, and I was surprised. I was amazed how many embassies have been attacked across the world over the years.
We're not well liked around the world. There's no question about that. That's why our embassies cost so much to build. They have to be fortified.
Yeah, I guess. I still contend that we're in Iraq and Afghanistan to be on both sides of Iran. That's what it looks like.
Oh, yeah, there's no question about that. They want to be able to forward base.
Right. Fly from both directions, whenever they need to.
Yep. No question about that.
Yep. Bye. I'm gone. I'm gone.
All right, thanks an awful lot there. Okay. Getting back to the war zones here. Over in Israel, a senior commander of the IDF in an interview in Haaretz said that as a consequence of a stronger Hezbollah in Lebanese politics, Israel will no longer make a distinction between Lebanese forces and those of Hezbollah. Now, Hezbollah has been kind of operating as its own little group. They have fended off Israel's incursions into Lebanon in the past. But now Israel is saying they're not going to show a distinction. If they go to war against Hezbollah, they'll go to war against Lebanon. They still want that Litani River, as long as somebody else pays for the ammunition and does the fighting for them here. Now, there was an interesting story that came out of Mondo Weiss saying about how Israel may be willing to stand off from the fence to Gaza in their fortified positions and just shoot at protesters, which I imagine they're doing again today, this being Friday. But there's a reason why Israel is not actually invading Gaza with ground troops. And it turns out that Hamas has constructed a rather amazing underground defensive system. And apparently it's a whole new spin on the idea of urban warfare. Because apparently Israeli soldiers coming in on the streets and alleys can be fired on from below. And Israel doesn't know how to deal with that. And that's why they're afraid to go on in there. They'll bomb it from the air, they'll shoot from outside the fence, but that's where they are right now. Over in Tennessee, the National Guard, they're involved in Ukraine. They have trainers in Ukraine. Can you imagine somebody signing up for the Tennessee National Guard and they wake up one day and they find themselves in Ukraine? But they're in Ukraine, they're with armored units in Poland, aviators in Kosovo. They're all over the place. And now they're starting to say they're running out of equipment. They've got equipment shortfalls. Planes, tanks, and helicopters are hurting the Guard's readiness. Basically, it's a beg for more money. You know, we're doing what you told us to do. Please take more money away from the American people and use it to buy us all kinds of things that go bang and blow people and buildings to little tiny shreds. Because that's what makes America great, apparently here. As you know, NATO is getting ready to do this major drill. And it's going to take place in Norway. And it's caused a bit of an upset with the Norwegian farmers. Because when they do a drill, they're going all across these fields with all these tanks and armored vehicles. They tear everything up. And apparently the damage amounted to tens of thousands of kroner during the last exercise, and this one is supposed to be a lot bigger. And the Norwegian armed forces are saying, yes, there's going to be collateral damage during the upcoming NATO drill, Trident Juncture, which is one of the largest in the country's history. And everything from livestock to vehicles may be affected. These are going to be live fire exercises, and the concussion waves from those artillery will traumatize, if not kill, everything from cats, dogs, chickens, pigs, and cows in the immediate vicinity. So it's another case of, it's like, we don't need the Russians to invade Norway. NATO's going to wreck it. Over in North Korea, Kim Jong-un has now set a timeline for denuclearization coincident with the end of Donald Trump's first campaign, meaning a little over 2 years from now. Donald Trump promptly tweeted out his thanks and saying, yes, it's a vindication for the deal that they did. Trump's critics are saying that he's being played by Kim Jong-un. But Kim Jong-un is still waiting for some kind of a gesture of goodwill and gratitude from Trump. We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha America, welcome back to our show here. And turning over to China, it appears they are well on their way to a significant lead in the field of hypersonic missiles. And apparently Missile Defense Agency Commander Lieutenant General Samuel Greaves issued a warning this week that the Chinese have now done several dozen successful hypersonic missile tests, and they cannot be ignored any longer. This was in a briefing with the Missile Defense Advocacy Alliance. The Undersecretary of Defense and Management and Engineering, Michael Griffin, also said, yes, China has carried out dozens of successful hypersonic missile tests, and said that Russia is not far behind. Now, the reason I was emphasizing the word dozens, if they've got that many missiles for testing, it implies they are out of the prototyping phase and they've actually gone into production on these things. Now, the issue over the hypersonic missiles is that every time the United States creates a defensive system of some kind, it's built around a doctrine. This is the defense we are defending against. We are building a system to defend against an incoming ballistic missile that may be traveling at maybe Mach 2 or Mach 3, and if we build a system that deals with that, that will be successful. And then, of course, the other side comes out with a game changer, and the Pentagon goes back to you, the American taxpayer, for more money, saying, we got to build a new something, which is a lot of what this talk about is here. Now they want money to defend against the hypersonic missiles. But at the moment, right now, these missiles are a game changer because there is nothing in the U.S. arsenal that can deal with them, primarily because of their speed and because they are maneuverable. So you can't get a track on them, and you can't predict where they're going to be when whatever you're intercepting them with finally gets there. And that is a significant game changer. Now, I know the U.S. military is talking a lot about military lasers and how they're starting to deploy a couple out to like the Navy fleet. But you need to understand, these are short-range weapons because nobody's ever solved the problem of thermal blooming, which means that as a laser beam travels through the atmosphere, a small portion of its heat transfers to the air molecules and they start to roil and tumble and create turbulence. And that will cause refraction effects, and the laser beam will spread out and lose focus. It won't be as powerful. So the laser weapons they've got now are short range only. The question is, will they be able to react fast enough to an incoming hypersonic missile? Again, get on target and fire in time. I wouldn't want to be the person who has to find out in a practical sense whether that's going to work or not. Here's a story. This is coming out of Defense News, predicting that fully autonomous mobile intelligence entities coming to the battlefields in the future. Apparently, mobile intelligent entities is the new soft, polite, kinder, gentler version of the killer robot, which is what they're really talking about here. Robots that are deployed into a battlefield that just run around killing whatever they see. James Cameron gave us a good illustration of what that was going to look like with the Terminator movies. And my concern about that is, A, can they be hacked and turned against our own forces? And B, would software errors cause them to start indiscriminately killing everybody, good guy and bad guy alike? As I was talking about yesterday, my big concern about mixing it up with Russia and China right now is that our automated weapons systems are running so fast, they could do something really horrific before humans could intervene. Because that's what happened when the USS Vincennes shot down that Iranian passenger jet. And I'm pretty sure that's exactly what happened when TWA 800 was accidentally shot down during an Aegis CEC test off the coast of Long Island. The computers are just running way too fast. When they make a mistake, humans can't intervene. And that's still going to be an issue here. The fact that these accidents do happen tells us that the military-industrial complex just wants to get the weapons out there and get the paychecks for them. And they're set out there with problems. Problems in the software, problems in the hardware. We were talking the other day about how one of the Zumwalt stealth destroyers has had to have an entire engine replaced. The lead ship's got drivetrain problems like you wouldn't believe. We don't have to worry about the Russians or Chinese sinking our ships. They're a long ways away to doing it for themselves. Remember the Freedom and Independence class littoral combat ships? Drivetrain problems, corrosion problems, couldn't get the modular arming system to work properly. The whole program is being scrapped before it ever sees combat, and they're going to start with a whole new and improved littoral combat ship program. Won't that be fun? It'll be lots of money. We're going to have a really good time over here in the defense contractors. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha America, welcome back to the show here, and we were talking about all of a sudden the hue and cry is being raised over China's very obvious lead in hypersonic missile technology, and Russia's not far behind them, and it looks like the U.S. is lagging, and so everyone's screaming, we've got to have the same thing, we've got to stay up with them, they've got one, we want one too, mommy, kind of a situation. And the U.S. has been working on this technology for a very, very long time, but it hasn't really come up with anything yet. And it leads to another article coming out of defensenews.com saying, can the U.S. military still innovate quickly? And that is a real critical question, because with this behemoth of the Pentagon and the military-industrial complex, that vast bureaucracy actually impedes the development of weapon systems. And again, I refer back to the book and the movie The Pentagon Wars about the Bradley infantry fighting vehicle, and what an absolute joke that was. And the reality is that in a lot of cases, between the time a weapon system idea is conceived and it actually reaches the battlefield, it's already obsolete. And if we can't innovate quickly, then we're going to continue to fall behind in the technology race. Now, again, Russia and China's equivalent of the military industries are much smaller. They're leaner, they're meaner, they're hungry. They're not caught up in a lot of, in the degree of politics and corruption that we see in the military-industrial complex. And that's why they're able to come up with very good weapons at a much, much lower cost. And this is nothing new. I mean, Harry Truman had to deal with this in the years going into World War II as well. All right, we're going to take a phone call now from Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? I got a couple of things I wanted to say. I don't know if you knew that Turkey's building the area where they're going to put the S-400 system. Even though it's mobile, they're building a couple areas that are going to be housing it, and they started that already. So that's a set in stone, I guess, now, along with India buying it.
Yes.
But Mike, I think Lockheed Martin was the one that's been working on the hypersonic for the U.S. for a while. Some successes, a lot of failures. But Mike, one thing Lockheed Martin was working on, they still haven't got it, was the supercavitating torpedo that Russia had since the 70s.
Yes.
They still just can't figure that out. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
And Russia's working on their second one that goes, I think, one and a half times faster. Because, see, the problem with those torpedoes is they have to slow down to turn. So there's a drawback to that, since it goes so fast in a straight line. So it has to backtrack. But, Mike, with this whole thing where the hypersonic missiles and the supersonic missiles, where actually they can, maybe the hypersonic maybe a little less, where they talk to each other, kind of like this hive, they call it hive communication technology,
yes,
where one will take the lead and it gets knocked out, another one will continue to its target. But Mike, I want to, do you know anything about these laser batteries we have, these laser weapons? Like, what's the recharge time? I mean, they all fly in like a bullet. I mean, it's not going to knock out something that's doing the, like you said, the dipsy doodles and stuff. So, I mean, what's the use of these?
Well,
really,
now, let's back up here. In theory, that's the whole point of a zero time of flight weapon, is that you don't have to worry about predicting where the incoming threat is going to be a few seconds from now. If you can get your aiming system on the target and you fire the laser, it's going to hit. The question is, how much energy are you going to connect to that target, which is where that issue of thermal blooming comes on in. And the other issue, though, is do the lasers do an impact kill? Is it like instantaneous, like you see in Star Wars, or do they have to dwell that laser beam on that target long enough to burn through the skin? In which case, the dipsy doodling and maneuverability now becomes an issue, because the laser beam may be on the wing briefly, then it may be on the empennage, and then it may be on the forward part of the fuselage. But if it can't steady down someplace, the heat gets spread out all over the incoming weapon, but never to the point of actually causing any damage. It's a very, very difficult technology, and they've had a lot of problems. They've been trying to use chemical-based lasers, eximers, and the issue is, how do you produce a laser beam capable of destroying the incoming threat without destroying itself in the process?
And what about reflective surfaces? Would they affect a laser hitting the object if it has a reflective surface, type of like a mirror? See, so you can kind of deflect maybe some of the laser's power with something like that. I mean, there's a lot of different techniques they can probably try to. But I mean, yeah. What about the same with the railgun, Mike? Like, what's the use of a railgun that shoots the tungsten? Basically, a shard of tungsten, right? That's what it's shooting. I mean,
it's a tungsten dart. Well, the advantage of the railgun is you don't need to worry about chemical propellants, and you don't need to worry about the fact. See, in a conventional piece of artillery, the chemical propellant basically explodes pretty much all at once at the breech and produces a huge amount of stress, and then the expanding gases push the shell down the barrel, and the pressure gets less and less and less. It's all concentrated back at the rear at the moment of detonation. With a railgun, the energy is applied to the projectile evenly during the entire length of the rail. And that means there's less stress on the rail itself, less stress on the munition itself, which means you can use more exotic munitions that might not survive a conventional artillery. And that's the idea from that. It takes a huge amount of electricity. You've got to have a generator there and a huge bank of capacitors to hold that charge so it can be released on demand. But that's the thinking behind the railgun.
I forgot to mention, Russia sold China the technology for the torpedoes, where these torpedoes will come up underneath the ship. They won't hit the sides. It goes underneath. It comes up under the, underneath, where that's the weakest part of the ship.
Well, actually, no, that's the strongest part of the ship. What the Russian torpedo wants to do. The days of heavily side-armored battle cruisers are pretty much over, and the sides of all warships are very, very fragile. They're relying on their active defenses. The Russian torpedo's goal is to break the keel of the ship. And if you break the keel of a ship, the ship is lost. There's no way to save it. And that's what that Russian torpedo is designed to do.
Yeah, Mike, and I want to finish up saying, if you saw Nikki Haley again, she's warning Russia, Iran, and Syria about civilian casualties in Idlib. I'm like, didn't they ever see the drone footage of what they did in Raqqa?
Yeah, I've been saying the exact same thing for the last couple of days here. I mean, the U.S. went on in and they just pounded that place flat, and there were thousands of civilian casualties. Nobody said anything about that. Oh, it's just collateral damage.
You know what's sad, Mike? These are people. Your home gets bombed, you got terrorists. I mean, you got to scoot out of your town, take whatever you got to grab with you. And where do you go? Food, water. I mean, this is the kind of crap we brought on to all these people in all these countries. And, nobody thinks about that. At least, the government people that we have don't care, But, I just want people to think about that. The suffering is a lot of different ways besides getting killed, It's pretty shameful, these people, I think. It includes all of them, Marco Rubio and all these other scumbags,
Have you ever seen the video that we did to Claire's in times of war? I put it up every once in a while.
No, I mustn't. I didn't see that.
All right, I'm going to repost it.
Maybe you can put that back on.
Yeah, I'm going to put that up on the next commercial break here because it's a very powerful anti-war statement, and we caught YouTube ratcheting down the number of views so it would never get up into any of the lists here. But I'm going to go ahead and put that up on the next commercial break. So anything else, Dustin?
No, that's it. Thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. So let's turn to the domestic politics, and the Kavanaugh hearings are coming to an end. And despite all of the antics by the Democrats, at this point, it's pretty much a foregone conclusion. Kavanaugh will be confirmed, and the liberals are just, they're just crying and playing with their Play-Doh and their bubble wrap and everything, that the Supreme Court is going to shift conservative for the next few decades. And they're very, very unhappy about that. But if you listen to Professor Francis Boyle, he's a law professor, he's basically saying the Democrats were engaging in kabuki theater, and the optics were not particularly good. I think the Democrats have actually caused more harm to themselves than good going into November with their extreme behavior at the hearings. Ted Cruz, I guess, lost patience with the Democrats going on in and said that the only reason they're acting like this, knowing the fact that Kavanaugh is going to be confirmed anyway, the only reason the Democrats went through this whole circus is they're still unhappy over the fact that they lost in 2016. They can't get over the fact that they weren't able to steal the White House for Hillary Clinton. And they're still having a tantrum. All these months later, they're still having a tantrum. Trump himself right now is clearly under attack. There was that Woodward book. There was the anonymous so-called White House insider editorial op-ed at the New York Times. And it looks like they're going for it right now because Elizabeth Warren has now come on out saying it's time to invoke the 25th Amendment and remove Donald Trump from office. She did this in an interview with CNN, saying he's deranged, he's erratic, and a lot of people are saying it does seem like he's not sure about what he's doing. But again, he may be getting bad advice. For all we know, somebody inside the White House is, dumping something in his morning coffee. Things like that have happened before in history. But Elizabeth Warren is now out there demanding the 25th Amendment be invoked and that Trump is out and Pence will be in. And the deep state, the narcocracy, will be protected and sleep soundly at night until, of course, they get us into World War III, in which all bets are off for everybody here. Now, Mike Pence came out with a statement publicly praising Attorney General Jeff Sessions on a tweet. And he said, "I hold Jeff Sessions in the highest regard. I appreciate his service to the nation." Now, Pence just sent a message that if he ascends to the presidency, he will preserve the status quo. He will keep things the way they are right now. He's starting to show that he is going a different direction from Donald Trump. Trump is very unhappy with Sessions. So are most of the American people. But Pence is saying, oh no, Sessions is great. Pence just basically ran up the pirate flag. Up in New York, there's a Democrat running for the New York Senate, Julia Salazar. And she's been campaigning on her life story and all the adversity she's had to overcome and all the great things that she's really done. And it's starting to come on out that it may be one big lie, because apparently the story keeps changing from rally to rally to rally. She can't keep the story straight. So either she's another sociopath or just another usual whack job on the left here. Hillary Clinton is back on the campaign trail. She's stumping for Bob Menendez, which everybody's scratching their heads. I mean, talk about ethically challenged. 18 counts of bribery have scared most Democrats away from Senator Bob Menendez, who's a Democrat in New Jersey. And yes, I know bribery and corruption in New Jersey, they go together like ham and eggs. But Hillary Clinton is going to New Jersey to campaign for Menendez. And they're going to have an event. A plate at this dinner ranges from $500 to $5,400, which is alarming until you remember Menendez has expensive tastes. The senator was credibly accused of running an immigration racket. He provided visas for several of the girlfriends of convicted fraudster Solomon Melgen, and that guy provided him in turn with flights on a private jet, nights in Paris, rounds of golf at private clubs. If it hadn't been for a mistrial, Menendez would be behind bars. And this is who Hillary Clinton wants to support in New Jersey. Like attracts like. Up in New York, they have a candidate running for governor. Actress Cynthia Nixon. Ooh, it's another actress. It's another entertainer thinking they're a politician. And she's campaigning on passing a single-payer health care law. No idea how they're going to pay for it. That's her entire campaign. They're going to pass single-payer, then afterwards they'll figure out how to fund it. And I hope the New Yorkers are realizing that that is really a very reckless thing to do, because the cost of single-payer health care might see the cost of taxes just go right through the roof, and New York is already heavily taxed. That's a very irresponsible campaign platform. All right, let's go back to the phones here. Glenn in Philadelphia, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. About this 25th Amendment push, all the people we're hearing from thus far as I know, have no medical, psychiatric, or psychological credentials whatsoever. And that whole process is predicated on multiple professionals concurring about the fact that there is indeed something wrong with the person, and that they can therefore, enact this. So all you hear is a bunch of blowhards with political agendas and their own self-interest involved, but nobody with any credentials.
You're absolutely right. They're not capable of making a diagnosis. They're out there making the accusations. He's erratic. He's this. He's that. But if you actually look at the 25th Amendment itself, it's a very complex process, and it takes quite a few people to basically sign a statement saying the president is temporarily disabled and the vice president has to take over. And then the president has the opportunity to come back and say, I am not disabled, and resume his office.
Right, exactly. And so, as much as they're rattling the saber, I don't think they really can get the kind of consensus they want. They have to impanel impartial, professionals. And
no, all they got to do is go on out and find a bunch of doctors and psychiatrists who are facing some kind of legal threat and say, hey, we'll make your problems go away if you'll say the president is nutso. Anyway, Glenn, thank you for the phone call. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we go back to the telephones here, during the break, I went out and I read the actual text of the 25th Amendment, and it does not, in fact, require any kind of medical or psychiatric professionals to be making a determination. Basically, all it says is that whenever the vice president and a majority of either the principal officers of the executive departments or of such other body as Congress may by law provide, transmit to the president pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives their written declaration the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, the vice president shall immediately assume the powers and duties of the office as acting president, at which point the president has a right to respond, saying there is no inability, at which point it goes to Congress, which would require a 2/3 vote of both houses to remove the president. So it's a long, involved process. But again, I want to stress something. I'm very disappointed by Trump. I'm still unable to figure out if he just didn't care about keeping his campaign promises, or if he is just so weak that he is being controlled by those around him and unable to do anything. But he is the legally elected president of the United States of America, and I reject all of this underhanded double dealing and attempt to twist the law, not to mention the truth, to get him out of office. If we are not a nation of laws, if we are a nation that is ruled by powerful and corrupt individuals, then we've lost the country. It's already gone. All right, let's take a phone call here from Robert in California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's
on? Hey, Mike, how you doing?
I'm doing okay.
Well, aloha, Mike. That's good. It's really pertinent timing. You chose to take my call right now. I cannot believe this. I've got to steal a line from King of the Hill, this star-spangled snow job that we're seeing over here with the Kavanaugh hearing.
Yes.
Oh, my gosh, man. I really didn't think that there was anything that these Democrats could do that would, amaze me any more than their blatant stupidity. But, geez, wow. I don't know what else to say. I'll leave you with that.
Yeah, it was amazing, and the fact that it's come on out that all of these protesters causing the ruckus were being paid by a Soros-backed organization. Did you see the pictures of the people wearing the giant condoms out in front of the hearing rooms? I mean, it was a circus, and it's disgraceful.
Not only that, but I saw the videos of the paper bags with cash in them.
Yes,
it was. Oh, gosh. I don't even know how to react to this stuff anymore. We've gone completely out of control as a country, and I don't know how to really, foment this into my head. I really do appreciate, though, the fact that Trump over there in Montana yesterday, he called out a couple of really important people. He brought up a couple of books that were, top sellers on Amazon. One of them was Judge Janine's Liars, Liberals, and Leakers. I think Liars, Leakers, and Liberals. Yeah, that's the one. And Dan Bongino's book. These are really important things I think the American public need to hear. I know you got a break coming up. Do you want to hold me over or let me go?
I'm going to let you go here, and we're going to do a break for station identification, and we'll be back with hour number 2. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Getting on back to the situation with the Carter Page FISA warrants. And we know now that the warrants were obtained with fraudulent documents, in particular the Christopher Steele dossier, that there weren't even actual hearings. It was all pro forma. The request went in. The warrant came on out to spy on Carter Page as possibly being a Russian asset. But there was a little piece of information that the FBI knew but concealed. And that was that Russian spies had already looked at Carter Page and decided that he was an idiot and they didn't want to recruit him. This is coming out from Paul Sperry of Real Clear Investigations. Now, people are still talking about this anonymous White House insider, a senior official. And over at the Washington Post, one of their reporters, Kessler, is saying, you need to understand, every time there's an anonymous feed from inside the government, it's always labeled a senior official automatically. Because if they say it's a mid-level official, nobody's going to pay attention. And so it may in fact be that this op-ed was written not by one of the top people, but somebody lower down. I still think it may have been a complete fix-up job to freak out Trump and try and make him act crazy so that Elizabeth Warren could come on out and start talking about the 25th Amendment here. But apparently a lot of people in Congress are very concerned over the ramifications of this, and both Republican and Democratic lawmakers are talking about their own investigation into what they're describing as a mutinous op-ed in the New York Times. And yes, it is. It really is here. Apparently, Chris Hedges, a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and author, has gone over Bob Woodward's new book and said, this isn't Watergate. This is just a book full of gossip. Watergate, all the president's men, was full of actual documented hard facts as to what went on. And this new book, it's just gossip, inside leaks, people saying things. There's nothing that you could take into a court of law. And so, all right, let's take some phone calls here from, okay. I don't understand what that message means. Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I've read 3 or 4 over the years, Woodward books. And, of course, when he did the Watergate thing, he wasn't writing a book. But all his books are always hearsay. This guy said this and this guy said that. There's no attribution. There's never anybody that was there that also, attributes it as well. He's been doing that since the 80s anyways. But I wanted to talk about, as you're talking about the Carter Page deal and all that, and also talking about Trump and the 25th Amendment and so on. Trump is an enormous. He's an embarrassment. He's a blow-eating blowhard like we all knew he was anyways. But I'll tell you what he is. He is the elected president, and you know what? He's the guy that the secret police didn't want elected and are trying to get out.
Yes.
The Carter Page story is just another, they're weaponized. You can thank our good friend, the Black Jesus, Obama, for weaponizing the secret police in the electoral process and getting these people in. But they've weighed in. Their institutions are reliant on nobody getting to the bottom of what happened there.
Absolutely.
And so all the leaks and so on, all these stories, all this Russian stuff, all this Carter Page stuff, they're part of that. They're one of the sources. Brennan and then what's his name, Rosenstein and Clapper and all these people. I mean, they're really, frankly, they need to be taken out and lined up and executed. Frankly,
well, not without a fair trial.
Well, it may actually come to that at some point, Mike. That's how bad this is getting.
Well, I understand what you're saying, but let me back up here a little bit. Okay, I'm not all that interested in anybody being lined up or strung up or tarred and feathered, other than humorous references here. But I definitely would like to see these people put on public trial, broadcast, so that the American people really start to learn what's really been going on all this time. And if there's one good thing coming out of all of the situation about trying to get rid of Donald Trump, the American people are paying close attention, and they're beginning to understand that the government doesn't really work the way that we were taught it did in school. And that's an important lesson. And this is one of the reasons why polls are showing Americans have lost all trust in Congress, in the government in general, in corporate media. The illusion is blown. That little matrix that we've all been living in is falling apart, and that's why they're all in a panic right now. And a lot of them are worried about trying to reassert their control over what Americans are thinking. Others are just worried about facing prosecution for some absolutely monstrous crimes. And the rest are just trying to cling on to their power and wealth as hard as they can. But it is a huge, monstrous web of corruption. That's what this deep state really is. It's all the corrupting influences in our society working in concert.
Well, no, I hear you, Mike. That's exactly what's going on. And I only said that mildly tongue-in-cheek about lining up, but I was not being tongue-in-cheek, saying since there is a coup really in place that's ongoing, that's been unfolding for 2 years, and the very center of it are some of these guys in the secret police. In other countries, that's the way coups are dealt with. It may very well end up that's what happens with the lining up and shooting somebody, or public tribunals, which would, of course, are better. But then when also aligned with these guys, and this goes back to Project Mockingbird, are people like the Post and the New York Times. And the Post, by the way, aligned with Jeff Bezos, who makes much more money by, I guess he's got the contract by putting the cloud into the intelligence services. Mm-hmm. He owns the companies that do the cloud. He makes much more money from that than he does with the Washington Post, which is a loser financially.
Yes.
And everybody knows what Project Mockingbird is like. These guys are on the same page. They're the ones who were echoing, who were saying these papers were saying all the bogus poll numbers and backing up all the backing up all the bogus calls that were made during the election. This is really bad. I mean, it's really bad. And George Soros himself, we all know, is connected with the CIA and some of the color revolutions. So they're the people that really we need to really watch out for, because Seth Rich, I'm sure it wasn't some good guy that shot and killed Seth Rich. I'm sure it was some intelligence agent.
Or it may have been contracted out to a hitman. I mean, the CIA and the mafia have a long relationship working together, going back to the efforts to oust Castro from Cuba. They were working together during the JFK assassination. I mean, Jack Ruby was not only CIA, he was also a paymaster for the mob. So there's a lot of overlap there.
He also helped smuggle guns to Israel in the '48 war.
That's true.
There's a huge overlap between organized crime and the CIA, going back to the Second World War. But it's really bad, Mike. And those are the guys that are, in my opinion, they're the most dangerous people. They're unaccountable to anybody. Nobody even knows what their budgets are. The Congress doesn't know what they are. Then not only the black budgets, but also the money they make from all the criminal stuff that they do off the books. They're a world unto themselves, and they do not want those institutions held accountable for what Obama opened the door for, which was them directly into the electoral process. The survival of the people and the institutions are at stake.
They are, because basically at this point, we talk about government and organized crime. They've kind of merged together. We saw the same thing going on during Prohibition, where the corruption was so great that government and organized crime were basically working hand in hand. And we're seeing exactly the same thing again.
And Mike, where do you put civil asset forfeiture in all this? Speaking of organized
plundering
crime,
the people,
government law enforcement.
There's
a lot of overlap here.
Yeah, the police are stealing more from law-abiding Americans than the burglars and thieves and muggers are. Anyway, listen, we're going to let you go here, and thank you for the phone call. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. Getting on back to this issue of social media, which is becoming very intense, and not only that, these monopolistic social media giants are starting to get a little bit arrogant. I think we're seeing some very bizarre behavior coming out of some of these very rich people like Elon Musk. I don't know what he was thinking of when he smoked that marijuana-laced cigar on a live broadcast. I mean, that's got his stockholders and his board just going ballistic at this point. But getting back to social media, Zuckerberg is admitting social media is a weapon and has declared that Facebook is in an arms race against bad actors, with Zuckerberg himself deciding who the bad actors are. And so there's no longer any ambiguity. Zuckerberg claims he's protecting democracy by shutting down opposing points of view. Social media is a weapon, and Zuckerberg has picked a side, the liberal one. Facebook's COO, Sheryl Sandberg, is saying that Facebook will present alternative facts to combat what she described as misinformation spread on Facebook's digital platform. This was in her remarks to the Senate Intelligence Committee. But again, what is alternative facts and what is misinformation is being decided by Facebook. And Paul Joseph Watson is out with a new video saying that basically this is all being run by social justice warriors, liberal snowflakes. The liberals are deciding what's free speech and what isn't. If it's liberal, it gets on out there. If it's conservative, it's being shut down. That's not freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is when you allow everybody to have their say on an equal basis, and you have a debate. And you put both sides out there and you allow the public to decide. If you are working so that one side of the debate is suppressed and hidden. That's not freedom of speech. That's tyranny and dictatorship. And that's what these social media companies are now embracing under the name of protecting democracy. They're not protecting democracy. They're destroying at it. They're taking a meat axe to it. Bit by bit, they're chopping it up. Now, over at Twitter, they're still out there saying they really care about pluralism and free speech. But if you look at who they're shadow banning, and even more important, who they're donating their money to politically, the bias is there. There's been a study that showed 90% of Google employee political contributions went to Democrats. Now, here comes the sting, if you will. Senator Mark Warner is now out there saying Congress will have to set social media regulations, says the era of the Wild West in social media is over. In other words, Senator Mark Warner is using this controversy over the social media to impose government control, to say this is what is permissible and this is what is not. So censorship has come to America. We've always had censorship in the corporate media. Now they're bringing it to the internet. And we're going to have to start finding ways to communicate with each other that evade the censors, the way the Soviets did with fax machines and the samizdat. Soviet Union tried and failed to shut that down. Turning to the economic news, American economist Stephen Roach has issued a warning that China and America could be heading for a new Cold War, because Beijing and Washington are basically at an impasse in the trade conflict, and this could lead to a new Cold War, which of course is exactly what the military-industrial complex want. Because a Cold War means that they're going to get lots and lots of your money to build all kind of weapons, and they don't have to care if they really work all that well or not, because the whole point of a Cold War is to be constantly preparing for a war that's never actually going to be fought. We went through that in the 50s and 60s, and we're talking billions and billions of dollars. And back then, $1 billion was a lot of money. Billions and billions of dollars spent building all these weapon systems that were never actually used. It was a get-rich-quick scheme for the defense contractors. And again, Eisenhower did warn us this was going to happen. Meanwhile, the U.S. Treasury Department has announced new sanctions against 4 people and 5 entities who, according to the department, facilitated petroleum shipments and financing to the Syrian government. So now they're targeting Syria's petroleum procurement network, which strikes me as kind of odd because Syria has a domestic petroleum industry. But the Treasury Department is just trying to find somebody that they can hit on, pushing us more and more towards war. India is now getting rid of their U.S. Treasury bonds and buying more gold. India is the world's second biggest gold consumer. At the consumer level, the people of India, they love their gold. And it's a big thing here in Hawaii. You walk around the shopping malls or any public places looking at the locals. They got gold bracelets and all over the place. They think it's really great, which it is, if you don't get mugged here. Okay, let's take a phone call from George in Montana. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. You know, something occurred to me the other day with all this social media stuff, where they're really private companies, so it's very difficult to impose the Second Amendment upon them. But what would
the Second Amendment? What does the Second Amendment have to do with anything?
I'm sorry. First Amendment.
The First Amendment. Okay. Well, let me ask you a question here. Let me ask you a question here.
Yeah.
Bakery shops are private companies, and yet the liberals didn't hesitate to drive them out of business for refusing to bake a gay wedding cake. So can you see the hypocrisy in this statement?
Yeah, but that guy did win the case, the baker.
Yeah, but he's still out of business.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But my question is this: if government can create a public park, why can't they create a social media website that fully respects the the First Amendment, and watch the stock of Facebook and the like plummet?
The government doesn't want an open internet where everybody can share what they know equally. We're a serious threat because we live under a government that has controlled us throughout our entire lives with lies, fraud, and deception. And prior to the advent of the internet and the independent media, they got away with it. They got away with some real whoppers of lies, and they sent a lot of people off to be killed and crippled in these wars of conquest based on those lies. The government is not going to set up a public internet social media forum. They don't want one. The government is fully on board with the corporate social media blocking opposing points of view, shutting down anybody who questions the official story on the Kennedy assassination or 9/11 or TWA 800 or any of that stuff. This is the crackdown. They hate the truth. The truth is their enemy. Anyway, George, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And once again, we're putting out our little collection plate, if you will. Folks, this is getting serious. It's a very, very tight month at Republic Broadcasting and at whatreallyhappened.com. And we really do need your help to sort of copy Alex Jones' motto. There's a war on for your mind. And we're on the side of truth and open, honest discussion and democracy. And the other side is on the side of you believe what we tell you and we will tolerate no other points of view. We're getting more restrictive in terms of the flow of information than the former Soviet Union, which may be another sign of imminent collapse. But I digress. The postal address where you can send a check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity cash is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas 78664. The phone number where you can make a credit or debit card donation or pledge to be a recurring subscriber is 800-724-2719, extension 1 during regular business hours, extension 3 at all other times. Now, before we go on back to the phone lines here, quick story just now came on in. Remember George Papadopoulos was a Trump campaign aide who was convicted of lying about contacts with people connected with Russia during the 2016 campaign. He was sentenced today, 14 days in jail. So I'm rather glad that it wasn't more than that. All right, let's take some phone calls, starting with Mateus in Canada. Aloha, Mateus. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hey, Michael. Could I just go off topic regarding this satanic statue? Sorry?
Yep.
Okay, so that's regarding the satanic statue that was erected as a response to the fact that there was a Ten Commandments statue that was erected somewhere in the States in a Bible Belt area.
Yes.
And I just wanted to point out that the statue, which is a traditional statue of Satanism, it has a male body with female breasts and animal body parts, like animal head and animal feet.
I'm familiar with the icon.
Okay, just for everybody that wasn't, that anyone who hasn't studied up on their Satanism recently. So I just wanted to mention that there's a lot of parallels to the liberal agenda here, the extremist liberal agenda, which is this transgender actually is depicted in the statue. It's a female breast with male body. And then the whole, like, think of a genetically modified fish that you were talking about, we were talking about recently on the show. Well, you know, it's this animal feet, animal head, human body. It's almost like the Satanism represents just mixing up the natural order of things. And it's even being reflected in our modern push for genetically modified organisms and transgender. That's what I wanted to point out about that.
Wow, that's a very powerful metaphor.
Oh, thanks. And then the other thing really quickly is to quote Michael Rivero, always look for what should be there and isn't. And, you know, on Alex Jones and unfortunately Drudge Report, there's just not the Israel topic there being covered anywhere near enough. And this is kind of like you know this, but this is kind of if somebody wants to know if a source of information is making a good effort, they're going to have some stories about both sides of this debate on the Israel topic. And I actually watch the Drudge Report every day just because I got so used to that during the election cycle. I still do it every day, but I'm realizing, why am I doing it? It's really completely filtered.
Yes.
And I want to say thanks for recommending. You recommended a YouTube personality called, what was it? Sorry, it was, he dives into the Israel topic even deeper than you do. Young man.
David Cole?
Somebody Green. I'm sorry. Next time I call in, I'll say that.
Okay.
Yeah, Truth Activist was one, and then the other one. I'm sorry. Okay, I'll let you go. Have a good show.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. And there are a lot of people who are out there. I'll tell you what. We're going to start with Al in Canada. And Al, I'm probably going to have to take you through the commercial break. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. The caller before, Mateus, you're talking about social media, and he was suggesting that the government should set up, their own social media website. Well, I mean, number one, if they did, they wouldn't be collecting all those tax dollars, right?
Yes.
And number two, why would they even bother doing that? Because they already have the Five Eyes involved in, getting all the information off of these social media companies as it is. This is something, that was written in the New York Times a few days ago, around the same time that this, this insider White House thing happened. And it's funny because it's basically, I didn't hear anything about it anywhere else. I mean, you have to actually look for this to get it.
Okay, I'm going to have to put you on hold. I'm sorry.
Up, right?
I'm going to have to put you on hold. We got to take a break for commercials. Do not hang up. I'm going to come right back to you after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we're talking with Al in Canada about social media. And before we get back to Al, I want to recap a little bit of the history of how we got here. When the Internet, or the ARPANET, was first created, it was designed to be decentralized. The idea was that in the event of a major war, the ARPANET could lose major portions of its structure and still continue to keep everybody connected. So there was no one central point where information was going through where it might be throttled or controlled. Now, in the 70s, as the Internet began to make its way to the consumer level, as people who've been working for defense contractors or universities went into the private sector and took internet connections with them, the government at that point tried to impose some control on it. And they went to the companies that were running the backbone of the internet and said, we're going to give you the checks for the funding next year, but there are new rules about who is allowed to use this, because we never intended for the American people to have this very powerful peer-to-peer communication system. And all of the companies running the background said, you can keep your money. We're going to take the internet private. And in hacker lore, that's called the Great Revolt, and that was when the ARPANET became the Internet. And in the early days of the Internet, we didn't have web browsers. We did have email. The primary means of social sharing was called Usenet. And maybe it's time to start thinking about bringing that back, because like the Internet itself, it was decentralized. And people would just post articles into the various news groups under Usenet, and you would get an open discussion. And yes, intelligence agencies would try and get on in there and mess things up. In fact, when there was this Exxon amendment to the telecommunications bill that was going to try and impose censorship on the Internet, leading up to it, every news group in Usenet was being flooded with pornography. Including the groups where it was wholly inappropriate. Now, there was an area on Usenet where people who were interested in that could share it. And those of us who were trying to self-police, we would say, look, this is not appropriate. This is a recipe group We're here to learn recipes to cook for parties and things like that. And the posters would say, I have a First Amendment right to put this picture of naked women and farm animals here in this group. And at that point, we started tracing the IPs of the posters, and they all tracked back to military bases and government offices. And as soon as the legislation was over, the porn flood stopped. So the government's been messing with the internet all along. Apparently, in the wake of that, they decided it was time to get the flow of social content centralized. Usenet came under attack mostly for copyright violations, which was justified. Usenet did it to themselves. And we started seeing the heavy promotion of centralized, corporatized social media, Twitter, Google, Facebook, and so forth, where now all of the social communications are going through a central point where it can be filtered and throttled and controlled, and that's exactly what is happening here right now. So all of these corporate social media operations are acting in the direct philosophical opposite of what the internet was originally designed to be. So Al, just sort of pick up where you left off.
Yeah, there was an article in the New York Times on September 4th, and they mentioned how the Trump administration, along with they call it the Five Eyes, the United States,
yes,
Britain, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, they're going after these social media firms and technology firms, and they want the encryption keys on some of these, these encrypted apps for cell phones and whatnot.
They want backdoors.
And, oh, yeah. So this is the New York Times. I mean, whatever people think of them, that's the only media outlet that they've even reported on this. Like,
no, I saw it reported in all the foreign press. It was all over the place.
Well, I mean, you could do a Google search, and you would think it'd be all over. And, the first couple of pages, there's nothing really big.
Maybe Google doesn't want you to know about it.
With the day that this happened, CBC ran an article about that these media apps may be stealing personal information. When it's like, what? It's beyond that. It's the government that's actually doing this.
Oh, it definitely is. Now, you used Google to search for the story, and I just ran a search in DuckDuckGo, and I got a lot of hits. So obviously Google.
Well, there's the difference, right? What am I doing?
There's the difference right there. Google is filtering the stuff. Google is, Google wants you to be happy. Google wants you to be calm. Google doesn't want you upset over the fact that all of your personal electronic devices are spying on you. Now, this whole idea of this backdoor stuff, first of all, it is a load of nonsense. It has nothing to do with terrorism or crime, because real terrorists and criminals can devise their own encryption systems the Five Eyes cannot break. And we proved that here with our challenge to the NSA a few years back. So all of this backdoor stuff is about watching ordinary law-abiding people to make sure we're not thinking those double plus ungood thoughts about how the government is running this country into the ground.
I think it's too late for that.
Yeah, I'm afraid you're right on that.
Almost everybody's thinking it. I don't know very many people. Well, I'm in an older crowd. Obviously, the younger people have their phones buried with their heads down, walking into polls and such. But like the people I hang out with, they're well aware of what's going on, and whether or not they're going to do anything about it. Well, and that's what they're counting on, right? They're just counting on people just saying, well, that's just life. Oh, well,
Well, they're counting on it, but again, the Soviet government made the same mistake, that they could be just as abusive and corrupt to the Soviet people, and nobody would do anything. And ultimately, nobody really did, but it didn't stop the Soviet Union from collapsing totally. And a big reason the Soviet Union did collapse was the fact that the Soviet citizens found a way to share information with each other all across the Soviet Union outside of government censorship and control, and they did it with fax machines.
Yeah, that's amazing. You'd have to wonder if, people even have the gumption on this side of the pond, or even Western civilization, to come up with such a thing, or even do they even care?
I think the majority of people do care. I think that if people really didn't care, we wouldn't be seeing the disastrous audience numbers for the corporate media. I mean, CNN was below SpongeBob SquarePants for a while there. The writing is definitely on the wall. I mean, if that were really the case, if people didn't care and they were just continuing to go along with the official story, we wouldn't be seeing this massive attack on the independent media right now, trying to shut down peer-to-peer communication. And all of this, of course, is a violation of the First Amendment. And I'm not talking about that part about freedom of speech. I'm talking about the part of the right of the people to peacefully assemble and petition the government for redress of grievances. And right now, social media is the new 21st century version of the town square. We all have a right to peacefully assemble there and air our grievances on an equal footing. And Facebook and Twitter and Google are absolutely denying that. And that is a big part of the class action lawsuit that is being brought against them by Freedom Watch.
Yep. And on top of that, the government has the inside track. They know exactly what's going on because it's wide open for them. And if someone creates an app or whatever that's encrypted and it catches on, well, they're going to demand the keys for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what the story on the New York Times was all about. They want those keys. You're not going to hide anything from us. That's the way it is.
Yeah, but again,
you want to talk about a totalitarian dictatorship?
Yeah, it's right out of George Orwell or Aldous Huxley. I mean, they're going to be looking at everything except for the real criminals and the real terrorists, or anybody else who knows that everything is being spied on. We proved it's very easy to create encryption systems, especially for temporary use, that the government is not going to be able to break. None of the Five Eyes can break them. When we put our NSA challenge, we issued 6 separate encryption challenges over the course of a year, and obviously the NSA would have been well motivated to break one of mine to discourage other people from starting to experiment with their own cryptography and learning how to write their own encryption systems. And looking at the server logs from the first 2 challenges I put out, there were a lot of people, including some military IPs, who downloaded that challenge and tried to break it, and none ever did. After the 3rd challenge, everybody kind of quit.
Yep, and that includes these idiot savant geniuses that are out there that just troll looking for stuff like this to do, and they couldn't even do it. And they're probably, they probably know more than the NSA as far as breaking encryption. They're just not, working for them because they're under the radar still. Anyway, I appreciate your time, Mike. I hope you have a good show. Lady Claire will be on, yes?
No, Lady Claire is not available. We are going to have a guest in the 3rd hour, and it's kind of a surprise, but Lady Claire is off doing other things today. So thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Now, yesterday we had a caller on the line who came on out and said Donald Trump had made some very inflammatory statements regarding negotiations with Canada and NAFTA, supposedly off the record, saying that he was not going to say what the deal he was offering actually was. It was so insulting, they're not going to be able to make a deal. And I have to apologize to that caller because it sounded to me like I had a hard time believing it, but it has now been confirmed. The Star is confirming it. Apparently, Bloomberg News is confirming it. And it's inflammatory. And it's not the only one. Apparently, Trump is now out there saying that our relations with Japan may sour when he tells them how much they have to pay for trade deals. Bad direction here. Bad direction here. Okay. Former President Barack Obama is out there making all kinds of speeches. He's trying to take credit for our current strong economy. He's saying Trump has nothing to do with it. This is all what I left to your country. And the unemployment levels are basically the same in our 2 administrations. So, okay, they're both telling the same lies. But just lies, lies, and more lies. Okay. Pope Francis, fresh from his embarrassing performance over the clergy sex abuse scandal here. Pope Francis is now hitting out at our killer money-centered culture that promotes poverty, slavery, and waste. And he ranted about modern society in an interview with Italian financial newspaper Il Sole 24 Ore, saying it valued money over people. And the Pope said, we can't ignore the fact that an economy structured like this kills because it makes money central and only obeys money. Technically, he's correct, but I find it a little ironic coming from the head of a church that owns vast amounts of real estate all over the globe. And can anyone here recall the Vatican banking scandal and how Roberto Calvini wound up dangling under a London bridge? By the way, speaking of the church clergy sex abuse case, don't you find it odd that everybody is getting ready to boycott Nike over a TV commercial, but nobody wants to boycott the Catholic Church over centuries of clergy pedophilia? Kind of a weird set of standards here. Beijing is now confirming that Xi Jinping will take part in the work of the Eastern Economic Forum, which is to meet in Vladivostok on September 11th and 12th. So Russia and China are now moving together economically. The world economic order is reshaping itself, and it's moving away from the U.S.-centric system, which is why we're now hearing, oh, China's the new threat. Russia's the new threat. We've got to give them what for and bring them back to the warm embrace of the U.S. dollar. Over at Wells Fargo, another day, another scandal. Apparently, the Department of Justice has launched yet another probe after a review found widespread document altering. And the issue is whether Wells Fargo employees committed fraud in their wholesale banking unit after revelations employees improperly altered customer information and may have added inappropriate information to customer documents such as social security numbers and dates of birth without their consent. If you have those two, a date of birth and a social security number, you can steal the identity. Okay, let's take another phone call. Jim in New York, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hi, Mike. I heard a lot of talk the other day about a civil war. I don't see that happening at all. I mean, there was no civil war after JFK was killed or after 9/11. And I think there could be civil disturbances if, let's say, there's a Soviet Union-style collapse. But as far as a civil war, that can't happen. I mean, who would fight who? Would it be Trump supporters versus anti-Trump supporters?
Well, it's a little more sophisticated than that. I mean, and again, I'm opposed to the idea of a civil war in the streets of this country. We already have civil unrest, there's no question. The context of that segment of the show was this idea that Donald Trump should take whatever part of the military is loyal to him and just start going on down to Department of Justice and FBI and start seizing documents and locking people up. And I raised the possibility that not all the military may be on the side of Donald Trump, and that you would have a situation where America's military would be split in two, pro-Trump and anti-Trump, and that would be a situation of two trained and organized military forces poised against each other inside the United States. That would be the doorstep to a real, honest-to-goodness civil war. Right now, tensions in this country are, in fact, running very high, partly because of the politicians playing of divide and conquer to keep us at war with each other. So we don't bother them all that much. But we're right on the edge. Black against white, men against women, gays against straights. It could erupt into major chaos across the country. Anyway, Jim, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're going to go right to the phones here to Daniel in British Columbia. Aloha, Daniel. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Yeah, just wanted to get this out there. This whole thing about North Korea, they've been showing good faith with trying to reunify North and South. And after Trump's meeting, I think there's been a lot of progress. And all of a sudden, the Department of Justice, headed by Jeff Sessions, comes out and they're going after North Korea for this Sony hack BS that we all heard about. The movie, the interview with Seth Rogen. Seth Rogen even believes that this was an inside job from Sony.
Yeah, there was actually, they actually identified it was an ex-employee. Disgruntled ex-employee leaked out all this data, and North Korea had nothing to do with it. But it makes for a great story and great propaganda against North Korea, so it doesn't matter if it's true or not. We're going to move forward with that. Now, as far as WannaCry is concerned, I don't know if that legitimately came out of North Korea or if it's another frame-up. But at this point, obviously, anything that's coming out of official sources or the corporate media has to be taken with a small grain of salt.
Yeah, we're told, I think I learned from you that the CIA can make any website or hack appear to come from anywhere on Earth. And that just throws another thing into the mix there. I don't know, I think Kim Jong-un, he's better off keeping his missiles and his nukes because, look what happened to Libya and all these other countries. You can't trust the United States.
No.
One hand doesn't know what the other hand's doing. And if he was smart, he'd probably just convert his entire nation to Judaism. He could have all the nukes with no inspections, get free money from the U.S. The Asian culture, it's like they don't like making deals unless you give a little bit, they give a little bit.
That's exactly right. And see, the reason I know about the Asian culture is two reasons. One, living here in Hawaii, I have a lot of the transplanted Asian culture around here, and I've had about 20 years to learn about them, especially when I was working at Square Studios. But the other part of it is you need to remember that my father was born in the international settlement of Shanghai, China, and he came to the United States to attend MIT. And he sort of brought that aspect of the culture with him, and I had to grow up with that around him, as well as his father, who eventually came on over. I think Trump and his advisors are misjudging not only North Korea, but China as well. Or maybe in their current belligerent attitude, they simply don't care. The attitude is do what we tell you or bad things will happen. Anyway, listen, I got to let you go.
Officially end the war. Okay.
All right, got to let you go. We got to take a break for station identification. Back with hour number 3 after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, hour number 3. And obviously for you looking on YouTube, this is not the lovely Lady Claire sitting next to me. This is a longtime family friend, James from Arizona, and he's out here visiting us on Oahu with his wife. And he decided he just wanted to sit in on hour number 3 of the show. And I said that would be interesting because James has had a very interesting history. And he's a pilot. He spent a lot of his life in aviation. He's been all over the world. He's been to a lot of the parts of the world that are now flashpoints, if you will, and he's met a lot of very interesting historical people. You got to think about maybe writing a biography at some point here.
I can't get by the first paragraph.
Okay. Well, so why don't you just start and give us a little bit of your history?
Well, I was born in a small town in northern Illinois, raised nothing exceptional with the childhood. Stole apples, little things that us kids did, and after that, I went to the military. I served 4 years of active duty and 4 years inactive.
Which branch?
I was in the United States Coast Guard.
In the Coast Guard, okay.
And we were going between Honolulu and Japan. We spent a lot of time at sea with rescues and meteorology. And after that, I went to school and got a degree and started teaching school and became a school principal eventually.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Oh, you learn every day. And
I got to hide my cheat notes here.
Then I was working on my doctorate, and I had an opportunity to get involved in aviation by a guy financed the whole thing for me, 2 airplanes and myself, and we went from there and did the teaching in aviation and then the last occupation I had, which was concurrent with my other stuff, was I was an international journalist and did research and traveled around in different countries and whatnot. That's my story.
Okay, well, the other day you were telling us about some of these historical people that you've actually had a chance to meet in some of these political hot zones, especially around Israel and Saudi Arabia. And can you tell us about some of those?
Well, originally, when the Council of National Interest was formed, I was a charter member of that. And there was a reception for the Prince Turki of Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
And we were invited to attend that. So I did that. Paul Finley from Illinois was the founder of the Council for National Interest.
Yes.
That's how I got involved in that. That was really, for the hayseed like me, was kind of an interesting experience because there was ambassadors and diplomats from all over the world there. And as a matter of fact, when we arrived, we were met with an armed guard, and I said, "What are you doing packing iron?" He says, "Do you know who's coming to this?" I said, "No." And we were there, and it was a very nice outing for us, and met a lot of nice people.
Okay. Now, you have been one of our most prolific contributors to WhatReallyHappened.com, and you post under the name Cactus Moon. And one of your favorite recurring topics, of course, are the doubts about the official Orthodox history of World War II, to put it delicately and gently. And we know right now that there is a war on the independent media, not only to silence dissent, but to silence those who question certain aspects of history that have been used to mold our sensibilities, to push us in certain directions. And certainly the story of the Holocaust is one such, which has been just pounded into our heads by school and corporate media and entertainment in order to basically guilt us into supporting whatever Israel does, no matter what horrible things it does do, especially to the Palestinians. And it's kind of interesting that we're being guilted into supporting Israel over the Holocaust because we here in the United States had nothing to do with it. In fact, we here in the United States of America sacrificed a lot of blood and treasure to stop the Nazis from completing whatever their actual ultimate plans were going to be, and we don't really know. Now, you've actually been to one of the preserved camps in Germany, right?
No, I've been to 5 of them.
You've been to 5 of them. Okay, well, pick one and tell us.
Well, I have met a Jewish videographer and historian. His name was David Cole.
Oh yeah, I know of David Cole.
And what David did was he got into an interview with the curator of the Auschwitz Museum. His name was František Pieper.
Yeah.
And on tape, Dr. Pieper admitted that the alleged gas chamber they were showing was a reconstruction. Another way of saying that, it was a phony. So that's what made David pretty popular. And I told him I was coming over to Poland and Germany, and he asked me to do some shots for him that he had forgotten. So that's how I ended up in Auschwitz to start off with.
Well, I understand it's since come on out that the crematorium that is on the grounds that is shown to all the tourists and everything didn't actually exist in World War II. It was built after the war was over to deal with all the typhus-infected corpses, because when the Germans retreated from Russia, they brought typhus back into Germany. Whether it was a natural occurrence or the Russians had weaponized it, nobody really knows. But it swept across Germany. They didn't have enough medication. And when you look at photos of these emaciated, almost skeletal figures in these various camps, what you're looking at are the symptoms of typhus, which includes...
Correct.
Well, I don't need to go into the nasty medical details about that. I remember when I was working on a film project in Milan, Germany, I made the point of going up to the Dachau camp, which is near there. And the guide who took us around there didn't say anything about gas chambers or extermination. He said it was a work camp. That all of these were work camps where the people that Germany put in there, which was not just the Jews, but gypsies, the gays, mentally defective, anybody that they felt didn't fit in proper German society, they were put to work. They were a source of wealth and labor for the Nazi war machine, because that's where all these uniforms were being made, and all of the boots and belts and everything were coming out of these prison factories, not unlike our modern American prison industrial complex. And again, Germany needed these people to stay alive. And the Red Cross recorded that they were very well taken care of. The Red Cross was allowed to have offices in all of these camps, which is a courtesy of the United States, never extended to the Red Cross at places like Abu Ghraib. So you knew David Cole, you talked to him for a while, and I understand he's kind of now backed away. He's received a lot of threats over his work. What are some of the other camps that you went to?
Well, let me back up and make a quick correction.
Okay.
In the original Auschwitz camp, what they're showing as a gas chamber, that building was always there, but it was used for a different purpose. They remodeled it. But what struck me about that one is when you go into it, there's a wooden door with a glass panel in it.
Yeah, a lot of people have pointed that out. That
it was just incredible that who could possibly believe this?
Well, it was a fumigant, basically, is what it was. As the typhus swept across Germany, it was being carried by body lice. And so in order to deal with that, hair was cut off very, very short, not just for the inmates in the work camps, but even the German soldiers. And we all have a popular image today of the German soldier having very, very short hair. But the reality is the actual frontline combat troops in the German army, they let their hair grow long, especially in the winter to help keep them warm and everything. But the hair was being cut off to get rid of the lice. And the Zyklon B was actually an insecticide. And they used it to soak the blankets and the clothing, and again, even that of the staff of the camp, trying to kill the lice and stop the typhus from spreading. Because as Germany basically broke down, supply chains broke down, the typhus just spread beyond control, and it just killed huge, huge amounts of people. And we all know about the story about how the plaque out in front of Auschwitz was revised downward from 4 million died there to 1.5 million, with the added phrase "of all causes," because the typhus was responsible for a huge, huge number of the deaths all across Germany, not just in the camps. The civilian population was decimated, and of course, bad things happen in war. And
well, that's been revised again down some more. It's down
it has?
Yeah, it's down to under 1 million, but...
Okay, well, so time makes ancient truth uncouth.
I wanted to, without interrupting you, I wanted to make a couple comments on Auschwitz. They had a display there of eyewear, glasses, and Zyklon B cans and shoes. Mm-hmm. And I walked by that display there like this, and you're looking at it, and they're about 4 feet high and down to 3 feet. And I walked around the side of it, and there was a door there. And I opened up the door, and lo and behold, what do you think I found? They were all false bottoms to them. They were on a V level, and that. And then the other thing that I found that was quite fascinating was in one of the buildings I walked to, and there was a big, looked like a 4 by 8 foot piece of plywood over the window where you could look out.
Yeah.
And it was painted black. Well, then when I went around the other side on the ground floor, I discovered why. Because that's where the Auschwitz swimming pool was. And that was used by inmates.
Yeah. No, again, because these were workers on which the German military was dependent. They were being kept healthy. They were well fed. They had the swimming pool. They had all kinds of amenities. They had an inside script they were actually paid with for their labor, where they could go to. There was a bookstore. There was a theater, which in the off hours, I guess, was a bordello. And there were stores there where people they could buy things. And again, the image that has been shoved at us by corporate media is as much a fantasy as Saddam's nuclear weapons. It's designed to convince us that we must unquestioningly support Israel's agenda, even as more and more people are seeing Israel's agenda is highly destructive, not just of Palestine, but of every country on earth that has fallen under their influence.
The bordello was a separate building, and the other thing you're talking about was a real large building that actually the Carmelite nuns had moved into and put up a Christian cross.
Okay.
Which whoever it was, the Jewish people there protested, but they were two separate buildings. And the other thing that I found fascinating was they advertised that the prisoners were taken to this one courtyard and shot. And they have a black background there. So I walked around behind that, and the wall there is one brick thick.
Yep.
And there's not a bullet mark in it or anything. So,
yeah.
So it goes through your mind, why are they trying to lie to me like this?
Well, it is. Well, look at the Zionist political situation coming out of World War II. You had had the entire world unite against Germany on the principle that one nation does not have a right to simply march into another nation and take it over for themselves, and yet that was precisely what the founders of Israel wanted to do to Palestine. And in order to get the world to turn around and say, well, yeah, we have to make an exception for Israel, they needed a propaganda tool that was so powerful that everyone would say, yes, it's horrible when one country takes over another country, but we have to let Israel do it in this one case. And that was where this all came from. And, if you read the autobiographies of Eisenhower and Churchill, and I think even FDR, there's no mention.
Charles de Gaulle, too.
Charles de Gaulle, yeah. There's no mention anywhere in there about this massive intentional extermination program. And one of the reasons, and I know I'm going to get all kinds of static. I'm going to get all kinds of static on this. This is the most protected secret. And they come down hard on anybody who even questions the story, because without that story, then Israel's true nature of having simply walked into Palestine and stolen it for their own use becomes known. And Israel's current treatment of the Palestinians then becomes much more obviously a continuing atrocity. Okay, we're going to go ahead and take a phone call here from Keith Rogers. And Keith, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, as you said many times before, in photos and whichever, is to look for what's there and what isn't. And one thing I've always found interesting, and everyone knows that there was tremendous suffering during World War II from all parties there, and that's what gets me is whenever they talk about a Holocaust. What about the Armenians, the Vietnamese, the Iraqis? There's millions of people that have died, and why just one certain people? It seems to come to mind. But anyway.
No, you hit an important point there. That one is constantly being promoted because Israel's political structure literally rests on that.
Right. But here's another one, though. When you say look for what's there, what isn't there? When you see these stacked up bodies of dead, emancipated people like that, all I can think of is the Rhine POW camps, which they refuse to allow excavation into to research. And so my theory on this whole thing is that they just simply moved those dead, emancipated German POWs that were reclassified to be used as propaganda.
Oh, yeah. There was a lot of propaganda at the end of the war to convince everybody that the Allies had been correct and the Germans had been completely wrong. They wanted to smash Germany. They'd wanted to smash Germany during World War I because the Germans are hardworking, they're innovative, they're creative, they make good products. And Britain and the United States back then really couldn't compete. And so even though World War I started between Austria-Hungary and Serbia, Germany was declared the enemy And they went on in and they just smashed Germany. And in the Treaty of Versailles, they imposed a private central bank on them to keep Germany weak and helpless and unable to be an economic threat to Great Britain and the rest of the West. Then when the Nazis came to power, they threw out the private central bank. They issued a value-based currency that didn't accrue interest to a private central bank. And Germany's economy lit up. It was called the German miracle, and it was such an amazing turnaround for the country. Time magazine made Hitler their man of the year. I think it was in 1938.
Yes, that's correct.
And it was at that point that all of the private central bankers around the world said, we've got to get this guy before people in other countries say, we want to transition over to that system. Yeah. Of a value-based, non-interest accruing currency for our country. And that was the reason that basically started putting pressure on Germany until finally Germany just said, we're going to start doing what we're going to do for ourselves. And, you know, Hitler did get suckered into going into Sudetenland and thinking that he could go into Poland, but he did have a powerful military. But in the end, World War II was all about smashing Germany down so they couldn't rise again as an economic power and never again once exist without a private central bank. And here we go.
On my show, Mike, that's a highlight clip that I use of the U.S. reporter reporting in Germany about how successful the German government had become. Well, you know what's interesting to me? If you Google or whatever browser you want to use there, the amount of cities, it's 50-some cities that were destroyed in Germany, and it gives you the death toll of 74% at least out of each one of these, and these Allied terror bombings. And then the P-38s that came out and scraped everyone that was running out in the parks and stuff that were fleeing from these infernos there. This is where the real destruction came from. And this is what this Allied terror bombing is. And it's the same thing whether you want to look at Africa or the Middle East or any of that stuff. These Allied terror bombings cause immigrants and or war refugees. And this is what's flooding the country, or countries.
Well, if you look, there are two things that stand out from the hidden history of World War II. And one is the firebombing of Dresden, which caused a huge loss of life, and there was no military purpose at all. Dresden was a cultural city. They made china. They were famous for their china. They were an art center, but it was bombed simply to try and psychologically shock the Germans into surrendering. And the second, of course, is the treatment of the German POWs after they surrendered, with most of them being thrown into concentration camps and literally starved to death. Anyway, we got to take a break for commercials here. Thank you for the call, Keith, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And over the break, James and I were talking about a couple of other things about World War II. And James, you told me an interesting story about what's happening to the swimming pool at Auschwitz.
They're trying to spin it now. The swimming pool, there's pictures of it all over, so everybody knows there was a swimming pool there.
Yes.
But the people that are trying to spin this thing are trying to say it was a water reservoir.
How do they explain the diving board?
They don't try to. They just ignore it. But I think that it's really important to understand that the Jewish Holocaust is a historical event. As such, it is subject to revision, criticism, and examination. And we have, in 17 countries alone, Holocaust laws. If you deny any portion of the standard version of the Holocaust, you will go to jail. That is not an opinion. That is a fact. I've known people that have been in jail, and right now, Monica Schaefer, 87 years old, is in jail for that very same reason.
And that right there tells you they've got something to hide. Okay, because if you were running around saying that you'd seen Bigfoot, you're not going to get thrown in jail. They might laugh at you. If you say you were taken for a ride in a UFO and you got to meet Elvis, you're not going to lose your job or have your career wrecked. Only in this one area of history, daring to ask a question will destroy your life. And like I said, that tells you they've got something to hide. They're afraid. Okay. Now, you had one other comment you were making about Eisenhower's German camps.
Yeah, after the war, the prisoner of war, according to the Geneva Convention, had to be treated in not a special way, but they had to be fed and clothed and so on.
Humane, yeah.
Which I might add that the Germans did, in fact, do that for the most part. I'm sure there were exceptions. But when Eisenhower took over, he changed their category from prisoners of war to disarmed enemy combatants, which mean they had no privileges. And you can still see these today. What he did is he put them in vacant fields. No shelter, no food, no water. This is all documented.
Well, that sounds an awful lot about how during Iraq, when all of the Iraqis who were being captured, none of them were called POWs. They were all called enemy combatants, which made it apparently okay in the eyes of the U.S. government to engage in torture at places like Abu Ghraib. And for all you Kafka fans out there, you need to remember, a lot of these Iraqis got tortured to death to find nuclear weapons of mass destruction, which never existed. And I'm glad that Matt Damon came on out and made that movie Green Zone, because it is something Americans need to look at. Given how much we have been lied to about everything, prudence demands we always look back at history with a very skeptical eye and say, are we being lied to again? Is history being reshaped in order to gain political edge? All right, let's take another phone call. Jim in Kansas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I've heard that there were 58,000 Germans in Poland that were killed by the Poles because they were so successful at farming, and that was the reason that Hitler did what he did to Greifswald or whatever, and that it was all about a corridor to Danzig. I'll shut up and listen.
Well, do you have anything on?
No, the corridor is correct. That's common knowledge. I've never heard of the 58,000. There was the massacre at Katyn, which the Russians massacred, I think, 15,000 Polish officers. But I have not heard the figure of 58,000.
You know, looking back at the run-up to... Looking back at the run-up... Okay, go ahead. Say what you want to say.
There were a lot of Germans that were basically invited into the Sudetenland because they were good farmers, and they wanted to be Germans, or they were basically welcoming the Nazis. Anyway.
Yeah, I'd heard that as well. But, you know, looking back at the run-up to World War II, where you're seeing all this tensions building between all these little countries, and it does seem so much like what we have today, where there's trade disputes and friction and way too much ego, too much population, and too much stored-up weapons, and it just kind of exploded. One of the things that Eisenhower did do coming out of the war, coming out of his presidency rather, was warn us about the military-industrial complex, and obviously he was in a position to know exactly what that was all about. And it seems like, you know, we spend all this money to build up all this weaponry, and then they have a war just to burn it all up, so they can turn around and say, we have to start building up more weaponry. And we were saying earlier in the show, where they're out there bemoaning the lack of a U.S. lead in hypersonic missiles. Mr. President, we cannot have a hypersonic missile gap. And apologies to the George C. Scott fans out there. Anyway, Jim, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go. We're coming up here on another commercial break. But again, the more that I have really studied all of this stuff over the last 24 years, the more I realize what an absolute pack of lies I was fed by every level of education, except for the math department. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And during the break, James was sharing some additional information about the corridor, and you had some interesting information about just how it was that Poland became the spark to really kick off the war.
Well, after the First World War, Germany was so divided that there was a gap between Eastern Germany and Western Germany. And the National Socialists, when Hitler was chancellor, was trying to work out a deal where they could have an open corridor. And the Germans were doing real well with this under the Polish president. but I don't remember how he got out of office. But the new guy that came in was not amiable to anything. And part of him not being amiable to anything was because France and Great Britain said, listen, we'll back you up no matter what you do. Don't you be afraid of Germany. At that point, Poland's attitude towards an amiable solution changed to belligerence. And as you know, that after Poland was attacked by Germany, attacked by Germany, France and England didn't do anything. That was called the phony war. And that's how that came down.
And I guess that's when people started making fun of the Polish people with Polish jokes.
Might have been. But the Sudetenland, what he talked about, is basically correct also.
Yeah.
But because they were Germans, the Polish did not like them at all. There was definitely a cultural conflict there, to the point that there was considerable violence against the people in Sudetenland. And this is all documented. It's not that hard to find.
Okay, well, we've got some callers waiting on the line, so let's go to Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, guys. I'm sorry to call in again, second time today, but I too have been to Dachau and Auschwitz, and I was trained as a staff officer in a lot of ways. And I want to bring up something that it's the logistician's look at the Holocaust, where the narrative is not only were there 6 million Jews that were exterminated, the narrative also says there were 6 million others. They don't talk much about the others, but that's out there in the destruction of European Jewry and all that, which is the basis, the Wallenberg thing. But I want to remind you guys that the Wannsee Conference took place in January of 1942, which means that if you're going to construct camps that can house 12 million people. By the way, in 42, by the end of 42, they were starting to be large-scale air raids, the target of which mostly were the German rail and transportation system. They were fighting, all-out wars in Italy and North Africa in 42, of course, Russia, the other dimension of the air. I mean, they were stressed to the max. Their transportation was stressed to the max. It was being bombed, and by the end of the war, of course, 1,000-plane raids by day and by night. But at any rate, imagine constructing camps to house and feed and all that for 12 million people, is what the original narrative said. And then, why would you, imagine how hard it would be today if we were going to round up the illegals in the United States and we're not at war, we're not being bombed, just the illegal aliens, how hard it would be. How many people would it take to do that? And if you're going to do that, and say you're doing that in the Ukraine and you're rounding them up and you've assigned a couple of divisions, which is what it would take, to do it in one particular area, then you round them up, then you herd them to a railhead that also you need for supply and wounded and everything else, and then transport to another railhead where then you take them off and then put them in these huge constructed camps and so on. And all this is in a transportation system that's under complete, total stress. And why would you do that if your intent was to, murder everybody and have genocide? Why not just have the people that rounded them up in the Ukraine and Poland spend a 2 cents for a bullet and put an end to it there? And it just makes no sense as a logistician. I don't think it's possible.
You've brought up a very, very good point. It's not like Germany had a surplus of resources to bring to bear on this issue. You're absolutely right. The building of all these camps and the transportation of all these people only makes sense in the context they were being used as factory workers to make materiel for the German army, which again, that's what the tour guide at Dachau told me was going on.
Yeah, the conference that he talked about, the Wannsee, that was Lake Wannsee near Berlin. Originally, the spin on it was that was a conference that proved that the Holocaust, the extermination of the Jews. Since then, it's been proven that had nothing to do with it. It had to do with everything, just like what you're talking about. So that myth was dispelled.
Okay. But imagine the feat of construction and energy that would require to start from January 42, when they say at the Wannsee Conference that the decision was made to do this, right? And then, by the way, Auschwitz is overrun in July or August of 44. So to get all that done in like 2 years, round everybody up in a total war situation, transport them, feed them under a complete bombing thing, it makes no sense at all.
No, it doesn't really. It doesn't. But again, truth is the first casualty of war, and Americans and people around the world are finally waking up to the realization that government lies not once, not twice, not occasionally, not rarely, but all the time. We're lied to by every government about everything to steer us to do what they want us to do. And now we're realizing that we are being lied to, and we're trying to find out the truth for ourselves, and that's why they've hit the panic button, and they've declared war on the independent media and the internet itself.
Can I make one more point, Mike? I can do it in 40 seconds.
Sure.
That is, your guest was talking about the Rhine Meadows. Please look that up, everybody. Rhine Meadows camps. When we herded several million German POWs at the end of the war into these camps along the Rhine because they were supposedly easy. You could supply them by the waterway and so on. But if you look at the few pictures that have come out and these camps were millions of people, just like your guest said, they were out in the open with no water, with no food, and so on and so forth. They look like pictures of Andersonville.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's part of the Morgenthau Plan, Henry Morgenthau Plan, to make Germany a pastoral society.
That's right.
And to pacify them. And that's kind of what was. And so if you're going to hide something, well, you've got to, if we're doing an atrocity like that in like Dresden and Tokyo and Hamburg and everything else, then you've got to make them worse. Well, lampshades and book covers and gassings and twin studies and all that other crap that we've been fed over these years.
Don't forget the soap.
You've got to make them look even more heinous.
Don't forget the soap. They were turning these poor Jewish people into bars of soap, and it turned out scientific testing has shown the soap not only did not have any human DNA in it, it was a very low-fat soap because most of the fat needed to go to other military applications, and it was made out of pig fat, which is a huge embarrassment because many of these bars of soap have been buried in Jewish cemeteries.
That's true.
Again, time makes ancient truth uncouth. People have studied the lampshades and discovered they're made out of ordinary goat skin, which was a very common craft material back then. In the 1940s, especially in Germany, people would carve up animals and they'd use the skins and bones and whatever for a lot of things that you would find around the house. It was not uncommon at all.
We had to make them into monsters big enough to justify our own war crimes.
Yes, that's exactly right.
You've got a good background going on. I encourage you to keep searching for the truth because that's what this website's all about.
Yeah, what is that website? And I'll write it down, and then I'll let you guys go. Sorry.
This website.
He means whatreallyhappened.com.
Oh, okay. I thought the guest had a website as well.
No, the guest does not have his own website, not yet. All righty. Thank you for the phone call, Peter. We're going to let you go and switch over to Richard in Alabama. Aloha, Richard. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
After the war, there was a program called denazification.
Yes.
Denazification included the confiscation of German newspapers and Polish newspapers, the confiscation of films and tape recordings of Goebbels' radio broadcasts. It suppressed. It grabbed up all of the diplomatic communications between Poland and Germany and Britain, all of those were ex post facto made military secrets and sealed up forever. And all of the films that Americans saw of Adolf Hitler were speeded up, and all his voice was overdubbed, not his voice. And therefore, nothing, I don't think anything that we saw or heard about Nazi Germany could have been trustworthy.
No, it really wasn't. Now, I question the idea of being able to speed up the movies of Adolf Hitler because, we're talking frame gates and so forth. It would be easy to do in the age of the computer graphic, but not that. But as far as the rest is concerned, and don't forget Operation Paperclip, where the scientists were all being grabbed and brought to the U.S. for various programs, including MK Ultra and the rocketry program, and learning how German propaganda worked. Which led to Operation Mockingbird, as well as just basically plundering all of the technology Germany had come up with. If you're as old as I am, you remember the reel-to-reel tape recorder. That began with a device called a wire recorder, which had actually been a German invention, and it was simply commandeered and handed over to Ampex, as a war prize. Not to mention, of course, the little underhanded stunt they did with those captured German Enigma encryption machines, where they made presents, the U.S. and Great Britain made presents of the captured Enigma machines to all the Allied friendly governments without telling them that the messages encrypted on them could now be decoded by the equipment that had been built at Bletchley Park. So even in the immediate aftermath of the war, the U.S. and Great Britain were already spying on their supposed allies. Meanwhile, out in Hollywood, all of the movie studios who'd made all these propaganda movies against Japan and Germany were now being told to start making propaganda movies against the Soviet Union. And a lot of people balked because the Soviet Union had been on our side against the Nazis. They'd lost a lot of people in that battle going to Moscow on the Eastern Front. And those people in Hollywood who refused to start demonizing the Russians in movies wound up victims of the McCarthy communist witch hunts and the blacklisting. And so it's just this constant continuation of evil and machinations.
A sidelight on that denazification thing is that's what got General George Patton in trouble, as you'll recall.
Yeah, he basically he was denazifying, but not to the satisfaction. He was being told, get all the Nazis out and replace them with somebody else immediately. And he said, well, no, because right now where I'm sitting, the old Nazis are the only ones who can still make what's left here work. They can keep the trains running on time. They can keep the lights lit and the rest of it. And he came under a lot of criticism for that. And a lot of people are thinking that may have been one of the reasons that led to his attempted assassination. Are you there?
Yeah, and nobody can find anywhere in any German newspaper or any publication the use of the Gleiwitz incident as a reason for the war with Poland. It was never cited until Nuremberg, and then it was brought up to confuse people. And once they had pretty much ripped the testicles off of two men to get confessions, and they had entered a dying declaration confession, then Judge Jackson ruled that no further discussion of how the war started was to be allowed in the Nuremberg trial.
Well, I remember that when they tried Rudolf Haas, he signed a confession in English, which was a language he did not speak, read, or write.
Yeah, well, yeah, but they wouldn't allow any evidence on who actually started the war. They
Okay, Richard, I need to let you go. We've got 2 callers left, and we're almost out of time on the show. So let's switch over to James in upstate New York. Aloha, James. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, sir. My background is my father, fought the Battle of Bulge. Also, what he was there during occupation. Occupation was another frontier. But, I'm going to lead into this question ultimately. It was, like my mother, after the war, she was only like 12, 13 years old. And she was brought back into these, whether it was a work camp, whatever. She was on the Czech border, like I said. And she was whipped and beaten into burying all these bodies, And she told the story. It's not funny. But, there was a guy that was like 6'5", where they had to break his legs and put him in a coffin. But what I would like to know, what is the historical precedence of the Sudetenland being on a Czech border?
I don't know exactly, but it was after World War I that when they took all this land from Germany, you'd have to research that a little bit, and I don't want to say
we'd have to do our homework on that one here. Anyway, listen, James, we're gonna have to let you go. No, phone James, not you, James. We're gonna have to let you go, and we got to take a break for commercial. We got one more caller waiting on the line, and we'll be back with the last segment of our show after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to take one more phone call, and that is going to be from John in Phoenix. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, what's up, Mike? I came across a Martin Luther King quote that I've never heard before. I was watching a press conference, and he said, "In a world that's 2/3 water, why are we paying our water bills?" And I'm thinking, all this money we spend on unprovoked wars and putting fluoride in the water, why don't we just cut all that and give ourselves free drinking water? I just don't, I don't get why they never play that. They always focus on some little white boy and some little white girl holding hands, and that's just all there is to it. It seems like there's more to Martin Luther King than that.
Well, it is a good quote, and of course, most of that water in the world is undrinkable. But getting back to the second part of your comment,
I got one more comment to say after that, so go ahead.
I was going to say, when you look at how much of the work product of ordinary people is stripped away from them and devoted to the purpose of killing our fellow human beings, it is very alarming. And right now, just looking at our own country, it's obvious we're in a wartime economy. We have been for quite some time, and you see it in the retail vacancies, the number of homeless and hungry, the deteriorated infrastructure. This nation is literally rotting into ruin because every bit of wealth our struggling economy can produce is being spent on trying to bomb the rest of the world into submission. Now, what is your other point?
I applied for the at the Federal Trade Commission for the General Attorney in Ethics position. I think I might be able to make a difference, and I think I owe you a big thanks for that. You take care, bud.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot, and good luck with that. Okay, we're going to let you go. And James, you said you had one more story about one other camp you wanted to share with us before the end of the show.
I think this would be very interesting. One of the camps we went to was Stutthof. We got there and it was closed. All that was there was not a night watchman, just a regular guard. So we were very disappointed, and we talked to him for a while, and I sensed that possibly money could talk. So I gave him some money. I don't remember how much. He took us inside to the theater, put on the movie for us, and started showing us the movie, and it dawned on me, I might as well be videoing this, so I did. Anyway, that Stutthof was such an unbelievable situation. The movie was about a gas ban, which none really existed. It was put out by the Russians, and when David Cole found out that I had it, we were going to try and get it to the Simon Wiesenthal Center to show them that they were already showing it, and it was a lie. We never had to do it, but because they took it down. But I thought that was very interesting that money talked at Stutthof, and we had a very good guard. That's the end of my story.
That's the end of your story. Okay, well, we're coming to the end of our program here on this Pow Hunter Friday, and James, thank you for spending time with us today, and I know your knowledge about these things is encyclopedic, and you do post a lot of articles on this issue. But again, we get lied to about a lot of things by our schools, by our media, by entertainment, by government. But if you look at the knee-jerk reaction of how hard this lie is being protected, it makes it so obvious some great secret is in fact being hidden. And I dread the day when the United States government knuckles under and agrees that questioning the Holocaust is illegal, and that criticism of Israel's government represents anti-Semitism, which makes as much sense as saying that the only reason anybody ever complained about the Nazis is they hate the German people. Okay, so there's the music. It's time for us to get on out of here. Stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of interesting things to share with you. And please take what you learned here, share it with everybody that you know. Keep talking up the fact that the corporate social media is now acting as censors and filters to promote the liberal political agenda onto America and to silence all conservatives.
And thanks
we'll be
for
back
having
on
me
Monday.
on.
You're welcome. We'll be back on Monday.
Okay.
Aloha, America.